Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our latest TMA virtual briefing previewing the first session of the 119th U.S. Congress and the outlook for the Trump administration. My name is Rich Carter. I'm TMA's government affairs consultant. I'll be the moderator for today's briefing. We're joined by TMA news editor Fran Eaton, as well as a very special guest, U.S. Representative Darin LaHood of Peoria, who represents the 16th Congressional District of Illinois. Good morning, Fran, Congressman LaHood.
Morning.
Good morning.
Well, we're going to spend the next half hour discussing the 2025 session of Congress, how the U.S. and Senate will work with President Trump to bolster American manufacturing. Now I'll turn it over to TMA news editor Fran Eaton, who will introduce our special guest and get the discussion started. At the end of the program, TMA members will have an opportunity to ask written questions of Congressman LaHood by typing them into the Q&A tab on the Zoom control panel. The floor is yours, Fran.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. And we are so delighted to have Congressman LaHood join us this morning. Congressman LaHood just won his fifth term and just began to start his fifth term in Congress. Congratulations, Congressman, on that. And we are so excited to have him to continue to represent Illinois on the powerful Ways and Means Committee and on two crucial subcommittees that have impact on U.S. manufacturing, the Ways and Means Committees on Work and Welfare and on Trade. In addition, he's also on the Select Committee on China. So we're going to start this morning with a softball question for you, Representative, talking about something that you have been very proud of, I'm sure, the work that you've been doing on the subcommittee on work and welfare. You've had success in areas of child welfare reform in the past session. Congratulations on that development. Could you share with us some of the things that you've learned while serving on this committee that have an impact on the potential fraud on the unemployment fund? That has really been a big concern to us. So could you just tell us what you've learned about the potential fraud, how it can be fixed? Can it be fixed?
Well, Fran, thanks so much for having me on today. And I want to thank all the members of TMA being on the call today. Look forward to your questions and comments. And Rich, thanks for helping to put this together. Always appreciate the work that both of you do. And what an exciting time in Washington, D.C. I can't tell you, how excited I am with the optimism and the enthusiasm with the new administration and the direction that the country is headed already in a very quick fashion, and the opportunity as a member of Congress representing the 16th district to play a role in that, to represent my constituents across central Illinois and northern and northwest Illinois, and to be a part of this transformation of our country in many ways. Fran, as you mentioned, I do serve on the Ways and Means Committee that has jurisdiction over a number of public policy areas, primarily tax, trade, welfare, and a good portion of healthcare. You mentioned the Work and Welfare Subcommittee that I chair. That subcommittee is a very broad subcommittee and looks at a lot of our welfare programs in addition to unemployment insurance. As we all know, during COVID, there was a lot of abuse of the unemployment insurance system, a lot of fraud, a lot of people that took advantage of the system. And frankly, the Biden administration did nothing to crack down on that fraud. And so our subcommittee in the majority has been acutely focused on getting rid of this fraud. We're actually having a hearing this afternoon. We'll have 4 different witnesses to highlight this and to make sure under the new Trump administration, we are recouping some of this money that was stolen and fraudulently mismanaged under the Biden administration. I have just a couple things that I'll read to you here. As of January 28th, the Department of Justice reports that more than 1,600 criminal matters remain open and uncharged. We have to extend the statute of limitations on this so that these UI fraud cases can be charged and people can move forward to recoup that taxpayer money back to the system. In addition, we have to make sure if and when we ever have a pandemic situation, we are not abusing this system like it's been abused. And so we look forward to bringing money back into the Treasury, bringing that money back to taxpayers. And so our subcommittee with our subpoena power, our evidence gathering will be very involved in this process. So We had a hearing back in February of 23. We got no cooperation from the Biden administration. I think it'll be a much different situation under the Trump administration. And we start that with a hearing this afternoon at 2 o'clock.
That's good to hear. There's progress. Those things are easy for us to forget about, but it's still out there and it's something that needs to be dealt with. Thank you so much for following up on that. So let's just get to the big issue that everybody's focused on right now, which is trade. We're expecting to hear a lot about that in the upcoming session. President Trump has focused on trade during his campaign, suggesting there could be dramatic changes on the rate of tariffs. And we are seeing that is what has come true over the past week, that tariff policy has been in the news and the policy has fluctuated back and forth. We don't know quite what's going to happen every morning when we wake up. So as they, our members, as they order materials, production materials and parts from outside of the US, need to kind of know what to expect. Do you have any idea? What are you hearing and what can we kind of make judgment calls on as we move forward here?
Well, great question, Fran. And I think you teed it up well. And what you just described, I've heard from a lot of my manufacturers throughout my district, people that rely on the supply chain, particularly from countries around the globe. And my district is, heavily reliant on trade. About 40% of the corn and soybeans that are grown in my district go somewhere else around the globe. Have many manufacturers throughout my district that are involved in the global supply chain and send products to customers and markets around the earth. And so having a robust trade agenda is important. I serve on the trade subcommittee, which has sole jurisdiction over trade agreements. President Trump has taken a different approach when it comes to trade. You mentioned tariffs, which I think frightens some of our manufacturers or people that are involved in international trade. I'll just say a couple things on my position on tariffs. It's maybe a little bit different than some of other my Republican colleagues. To me, tariffs are taxes in many ways. They're taxes on my consumers. They're taxes on my constituents. They're taxes on businesses. They're taxes on my farmers. That's what they are. And they also don't pay for themselves if you look at the economics of it. Now, can tariffs be used in a strategic and targeted way to go after bad actors and countries that don't abide by the same rules and standards or take advantage of the U.S.? Absolutely. And I think President Trump, during his first administration, did an excellent job in going after those countries, particularly China and others that have really cheated the system, taken advantage of the U.S. market to do that. And so I look at this as a balanced approach when it comes to tariffs, that tariffs can be implemented, again, in a targeted way, but you have to also do that in concert with tax reform, bringing down taxes, making sure we're helping our small and medium-sized businesses with R&D tax credit, 100% bonus depreciation, 20% pass-through. Those things help. So we have to have that. You have to have energy production at a lower rate. You're going to see that under this administration. You got to fix our border problem, which will help. You have to bring in more workforce. I mean, all those things together, I think, can offset tariffs, and having a roaring economy can do that. If it's just predicated on tariffs and tariff policy, I think we have to be very, very careful about. The last point that I will make on this, Fran, and I think you've seen this over the last 2 weeks, you've heard the expression flooding the zone. Well, the president is flooding the zone in many different ways over the last 2 weeks. And, he had talked about tariffs on Mexico and Canada. He gave them a 3 or 4 day notice. And voila, what happened? They came to him and said, hey, we don't want these tariffs. This is going to be detrimental to our country. He's a master negotiator, and those tariffs did not go into effect, as we know. And so I give him some discretion and some flexibility on being a negotiator, working with these countries to get the best deal possible for America moving forward.
Well, just to let you know where our people are standing, we were just conducting a preliminary survey just in the past couple of days on this issue, and our members are 49% opposed to tariffs, 41% in favor of tariffs, and 10% undecided at this time. So we've got a lot of listening to going on, and everyone has a different angle on it, but you might carry that information to you. We'll update it as we go along, but we're hearing that they're still trying to make decisions, I'm sure, as to how it will affect their plans. And it's an awareness. I'm sure the president is aware of the fact that they make plans ahead of time a long way. So that's a big issue.
Well, let me, Fran, on that, it's a great point. We have to remember when we think about your membership with TMA, and when I think about small and medium-sized businesses across my district, what do they want? They want certainty and predictability, right? As they make those long-term investments, they don't want massive disruptions to the supply chain and to their business. And so we got to be careful both on the tax front, on the trade front, on the tariff front, of making sure that we are not making knee-jerk reactions that create waves that disrupt the flow of business and our economic system. And so we need to keep that in mind. And I've tried to bring that voice to the Ways and Means Committee with a number of my colleagues.
Well, thank you for doing that. And I'm sure you'll be hearing more as time goes by, and we look forward to seeing how this all works out. Of course, we are concerned about the impact China has had on Illinois and the different things that have been introduced here for us. And you and other congressional leaders recently held a forum in the Kankakee area concerning China's plan to develop a CCP influenced factory, which is called Goshen. Local residents have been fighting the effort and concerned about what it could mean for their area. What should TMA members expect to happen with Goshen over the next couple of years? And will the Trump administration intervene, do you think? And will China establish itself in an area just south of Chicago? Your thoughts?
Well, I hope not. And I'm working hard to make sure it doesn't happen in Kankakee, which is right on the border of my district. So just so people are aware, Goshen is a company that is owned and operated by the CCP, the Communist Chinese Party. It's a battery company that they want to build. It's not been built yet, but they're in the process of doing that. They also have a similar plant in Green Township, Michigan, which is in northwest Michigan. And so I've introduced a bill called the No Goshen Act. Now, just backing up, Fran, I serve on our Select Committee on China. I serve on our Intelligence Committee. Our number one adversary is China. I don't say this to scare people, but China has a plan to replace the United States, and they're working at it every single day. And when we have companies like Goshen that are directly tied to the CCP, I am not in favor of having them come and set up shop in Illinois. Couple that with the fact that our governor in Illinois, J.B. Pritzker, wants to give them upwards to $800 million of federal taxpayer money to subsidize a Chinese company. That shouldn't be what we do as Americans. And so for various reasons, I've been involved with the local citizenry there in Kankakee. We did have a field hearing there last year that was well attended, had a number of other members of Congress there that highlighted this direct connection to the CCP. In addition, the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, which was Biden's new Green Deal, the money that is going to J.B. Pritzker comes from that fund. Again, taxpayer money. If the free market system wants to move forward with that, that's fine. But having taxpayers subsidize a Chinese company in Illinois it shouldn't happen. And so we've raised this to a high level. Our bill that was introduced, again, this Congress, the No Goshen Act, is a bipartisan bill. We have a number of Democrats on that bill that recognize we can't be reliant on China for our rare earth minerals, for battery production. And while I'm, again, for businesses wanting to come to Illinois, they shouldn't be tied to the Communist Chinese Party because, again, they're working against our U.S. interests, in my view, at every single level, whether that's on national security, whether that's diplomatic, whether that's in technology or economically. They are an adversary, and we have to treat them that way.
So do you expect them to continue? I mean, with this, is there any, I mean, you have the act going, would that stop any in just Illinois or the whole nation? How would that work?
Yeah, so I don't know if you've seen, but in Michigan, there's been an announcement up there because of the pushback from the local officials there that they're no longer moving forward with the plan in Michigan, as I understand it. That is good news. Again, the money that Pritzker wanted to use, $800 million of taxpayer money, I think that money, it's going to be very, very difficult to get that out of this new administration. So our legislation, if passed into law, would solve the problem. And I hope we're able to do that, again, in a bipartisan way. That will work through the legislative process. We hope it doesn't get to that. We're in conversations with the Trump administration on this issue. And by the way, Fran, during the presidential campaign, J.D. Vance, our VP nominee at the time, went to the facility in Green Township, Michigan, to raise awareness on this from a national security standpoint.
All right. Well, we were surprised to hear about it and very interested in seeing you intervene in that and take interest. We look forward to seeing more at the national level as we go along here. Rich, we're at time for you to take on some questions from our TMA members. And thank you so much again, Congressman, for taking time. We look forward to following up with this in the days ahead.
Thank you, Fran.
Thank you, Fran, as well. And now it's time for questions and answers with TMA members. For those of you who are on your computers, or if you're using the mobile app, you can type your question in and submit it through the Q&A tab on the Zoom control panel. I'll read the questions and ask Congressman LaHood to answer them. In the meantime, I'll ask the Congressman the first question, which was pre-submitted by a TMA member. The question is, Congressman, we're hearing a lot right now about the Trump tax cuts and what the future of those are. They were very beneficial to us when they were installed and still are today. What can you tell us about the future of the Trump tax cuts and its impact on business owners here in America? Congressman?
Well, thank you, Rich, for the question. Listen, it's the number one legislative issue we have to get done this year. Some people call this year the Super Bowl of tax. I mentioned I serve on the Ways and Means Committee, which has sole jurisdiction over taxes. Backing up, you referenced it, in 2017, under the first Trump administration, we passed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. I would argue it's probably the most impactful piece of legislation that I've voted on in my 9 years in Congress, because we totally revamped the tax code. And what we did is we brought down tax rates for small businesses, medium-sized businesses, large businesses, but also for individuals. We revamped the entire tax code, and it was about 5 years worth of work that went into that. And it only could have been done under President Trump and his leadership and a Republican Congress. But think about what we did after that passed. We created the greatest economy in my lifetime, record low unemployment, highest wages we've ever had, record investment in the United States. We don't talk about this enough. We moved 6.5 million people out of poverty. It was the quickest period of time that many people have been moved out of poverty in the United States. And so we did that, again, by doing all those things. We also, on the international tax provisions, we changed, it's called GILTI and BEAT. We changed those. We allowed $3.5 trillion to be repatriated to the United States during that period of time. Prior to that, we heard a lot about inversions, where companies would go to Ireland or England or go to another country around the globe and invert there because of our international tax code. That all changed during the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. We never hear about inversions anymore because of what we did there. So that's a small part of it. I also mentioned the importance of the R&D tax credit, research and development tax credit, the 100% bonus depreciation, the 20% pass-through for S-corps. I mean, these are vitally important. Bringing down the corporate rate, depending on how your company is structured, to 21% had monumental effects to make us so competitive, bring more money back to the United States. Now, obviously COVID got in the way of that a little bit. We had record inflation because all the spending under the Biden administration. But I mentioned it's a Super Bowl of tax because all of those, a number of those provisions that I just mentioned expire at the end of 2025 if we don't do anything. So it is imperative now, and we're working every single day on the Ways and Means Committee to get this through the Ways and Means Committee, get it to the House floor. That's part of what you're hearing in D.C. on the negotiation through budget reconciliation. Do we do one bill or two bill? Obviously, we have a razor-thin majority in the House, but this has to be priority 1, 2, and 3 for the economy. Because if you go back and think about the presidential election, one thing that never changed throughout the election was 70% of the people in the country, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, thought the country was headed in the wrong direction, predicated on two things: the economy and immigration. Economy has to be number one. This is the way we fix that. And again, I go back to what I said before: certainty and predictability for long-term investment by companies. Taxes are a huge part of that. If we do nothing this year, it'll be $4.5 trillion of expiring tax provisions, which will be detrimental to businesses and companies.
Thanks, Congressman. Again, if you'd like to ask a question, please type your question in the Q&A tab on the Zoom control panel. All right, we're starting to get some questions. This one is about Rockford. Accurai Gunite, a Rockford trucks parts manufacturer, closed recently, losing 200 plus manufacturing jobs. Estwing, a world-class hammer manufacturer based in Rockford, was told by Home Depot they would not allow price increases and dropped them. How do we help American manufacturers and not encourage these box stores to gut American manufacturing? Congressman?
Yeah, I mean, what did President Trump run on obviously taking care of America first? I mean, part of what he's talked about with his tariff policy is bringing manufacturing back to the United States. I think you're going to see an effort by this administration that looks at companies, large corporations that continue to outsource or rely on foreign competitors, particularly China. And again, how do we incentivize that manufacturing to come back to the United States? Part of that has to do with, again, fixing our tax code, but also holding some of these corporations accountable and putting America first and American jobs first. That has to be part of what we do in this country. And I think if you look at the team that President Trump has put around him economically, from the new U.S. Trade Representative to the new Treasury Secretary to the new head of the domestic policy in the White House, these are individuals that are going to focus on bringing that manufacturing back. But to your point, Rich, when you have a corporation, you mentioned Home Depot or others that continue to engage in that, I think there has to be forceful interaction between us in the Congress and also the administration on the consequences of continuing to do that.
Thanks, Congressman. Again, if you have a question, please type it in the Q&A tab. We have time, I think, for one or two more questions. This one, Congressman's more of a statement, I think. I think it's about, he says, we're an injection molder and assembly operation in Niles, Illinois, started operation in 2019, largely operating under the 2017 Jobs Act. And there's a list of needs I think he wants you to prioritize in the continuation of that act. Number one, accelerated depreciation. Number two, 20% pass-through. Number three, guilty again, 5%. Number four, R&D tax credit. Number five, DACA. 6, industrial policy to support SME manufacturers. And 7, land banks to support building new manufacturing.
Well, Rich, the first 4 things that were mentioned there, I've talked about. Those are foundational to the current tax bill that we're working on. They will be a part of this bill that we get passed. It has to be there. And so I appreciate that reinforcement from that question and that email or text. Vitally important to our small and medium-sized businesses. And so, President Trump is on board with that. The biggest thing for us as we think about this tax bill is how do we offset it with spending cuts? And that's what DOGE is working on, the Department of Government Efficiency that Elon Musk is in charge of. It's, I think they're off to a good start. They've been a little disruptive, but we need some disruption when we're $36 trillion in debt, right? So finding those cuts that go along with our tax bill is what we're dealing with right now, and getting our colleagues to come on board with some of these deep cuts that we have to make in government. But again, it would be a much different conversation we're having today if we were $36 trillion in surplus. We're not. We have to find the appropriate government cuts to make. Some of those will, they'll cause a little pain, but we got to think about the reward of having those tax cuts that let the free market system prosper and grow, because we're not going to move this country forward with more government spending. We have to have the private sector flourishing. That will be the predicate for our tax bill we put forward this year.
Thanks, Congressman. All right, last question we have right here concerning China. Congressman, what is the downside to having a $400 billion trade deficit with China?
Well, China takes advantage of our market, right? And just taking a step back, Rich, if you go back to roughly 20 years ago, well before I was in Congress, we allowed China into the World Trade Organization. And the argument at the time, it was very controversial, by the way, it had to be voted on by Congress. Do we let them into the World Trade Organization? And the argument at the time was, let's bring China in because they're going to liberalize their economy. They're going to become more like us. They're going to democratize. And 22 years later, we realized that was a mistake. They have not done that. They play by a different set of rules and standards than every other industrialized country in the world. They've manipulated the World Trade Organization. They've taken advantage of that. Now, they've had tremendous economic success. They've moved millions and millions of people out of poverty by taking advantage of our system. Set aside that they steal our intellectual property, that they are, they steal many of our issues related to quantum and AI and high capacity chip manufacturing. So there has to be consequences to China because, as I said earlier, China has a plan to replace the United States, and they're working at it every single day. The sooner we wake up to that, better. So to continue to have deficits with China is just unacceptable. We have to level that playing field. We have to hold them accountable. They can't continue to do this while they're trying to undermine us and beat us economically, technologically, from a national security standpoint. So our select committee on China is focused in a bipartisan way on how do you win that strategic competition against China. Now, what's tough is our economies are intertwined, as we've alluded to, and lots of people on this call know, is we're intertwined at every level. You take any sector of our economy, we're intertwined with China on manufacturing, on banking, on insurance, on investment, lots of things with China. And so you can't necessarily decouple or go to a Cold War mentality because it will hurt both of our economies. But it's using leverage and holding them accountable. And if they don't make those changes that are necessary, there has to be consequences to that. And I think you're going to see a Trump administration that moves forward with that.
Thanks so much, Congressman. Well, unfortunately, we've run out of time. Congressman, do you have any last-minute thoughts for TMM members?
Well, let me just thank you for the questions. Really on point and really important to the work we're doing both on trade and tariffs and taxes moving forward. As I said at the beginning, I'm proud and honored to represent my district and lots of my manufacturers that are throughout Central Illinois and Northern and Northwest Illinois. Look forward to staying in touch with you, Rich and Fran and your team. And please don't hesitate to reach out on any of the issues we talked about today. But I'm excited for the opportunity that we have to turn the direction of the country, move us forward, and get us back on track.
Thanks so much, Congressman.
Thank you.
Well, I want to thank Congressman Darin LaHood for joining us today, along with TMA News Editor Fran Eaton for leading a wonderful discussion. Of course, we want to thank all of our TMA members who took time out of their day to join us today. We had a record turnout, so we appreciate that. So thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
You.
Goodbye.
Thanks. Thank you.